Built in 1904, Winterbourne House gives a glimpse into life at the start of the 20th century. You can find out how John and Margaret Nettlefold, a wealthy Edwardian couple, lived and raised their children here while undertaking work to support the local community. The house had had many different owners and uses over the years. Very little furniture remains from the Nettlefolds' time, and we cannot be sure exactly how they decorated the room. In order to recreate the atmosphere of the Nettlefolds family home, the house has been restored in splendid arts and crafts style, displaying the rooms as they might have looked when the house was first built. We will start our tour with the drawing room. The drawing room was a place for family relaxation and for entertaining guests. The plasterwork on the walls and ceiling are typical of arts and crafts design. The decorative items are of the period, but most are not original to Winterbourne. An exception is the 1850s dinner service in the cabinet, which belonged to John and Margaret. Its Chinese-inspired design was very popular in the 19th century. The panels of this room introduce you to the arts and crafts features of Winterbourne and tells you about Margaret's life and interests. Margaret might have sat here writing in her diary while enjoying the view of the garden. Margaret grew up in Moseley, a suburb of Birmingham. Her father, Arthur Chamberlain, was a wealthy brass founder and chairman of Knox Limited, where John Sutton Nettlefold later served on the board. She was one of the first pupils to attend Edgbaston High School for girls. Later, she studied drawing and painting at the renowned Birmingham School of Art. Alongside her studies, Margaret fitted a busy social schedule that consisted in dances, fancy dress parties, theater trips, and holidays. In her diaries, there is never a dull moment. Throughout her life, Margaret worked hard to improve the lives of others. She dedicated much of her time to the Women's Hospital and other local charities. She also helped her husband, John Sutton Nettlefold, in his work, such as acting as a translator on his trip to Germany to research modern housing initiatives. Margaret believed that women had the right to vote, to receive an education, and to develop professional careers. In 1908, Margaret was invited to Edgbaston High School for Girls to give the pupils careers advice. She told them that if they wanted to vote, they should also be able to support themselves. She recommended a wide range of careers for girls, from farming to medicine. She later became president of the Parents' National Education Union. Margaret enjoyed a loving relationship with both her parents, Arthur and Louisa. Her mother, Louisa, was a member of the Kenrick family who owned a prosperous metalware firm. Louisa died in 1892 and she was only 45 years old. Margaret had 5 sisters and 2 brothers. All the girls benefited from the family's commitment to women's education. Nellie attended Newnham College in Cambridge and achieved high grades despite the fact that women couldn't take degrees at that time. Kitty trained in medicine and became a doctor. World War I would claim the life of Margaret's brother John, who died at Ypres in 1917. The hallway. The wide and gracious hallway was inspired by 17th century long galleries. Country Life magazine in 1911 described the hallway as a long apartment, spacious and well proportioned. From this hallway opens all the rooms which look out onto the broad terrace and the garden sloping away in the southeast. At the far end is a 1904 oil painting of Margaret Nettlefold. She is pictured entering the dining room at Winterbourne, which is now the tea room. If you look carefully, you can just make out the family dog Scruffy by her feet. Under the stairs, you can see the opening of the Nettlefold safe, which now contains a display of beautiful period silverware. The decorative border around the display is made up of screws, reflecting the origins of the family's wealth. Further down the hallway, you can see the ceremonial spade which Margaret Nettlefold used to cut the first sod from the ground for the foundation of John Sutton Nettlefold's housing project, the Morpole Estate in Harborne. A road in Harborne bears her name, Margaret Grove. The Nettlefold family loved reading. Most of the books in this cabinet belong to John and Margaret Nettlefold. The Thackeray novels are labeled with John's personal bookplate, and the Victor Hugo novels carry Margaret's bookplate. John was also an author, and his books Practical Housing, Practical Town Planning, and Garden Cities and Canals were written at Winterbourne between 1908 and 1914. The Nettlefolds had 8 children, of whom 2 died as babies. Louisa, born in 1892 and passing away at just 10 weeks old after falling ill on a family trip to the seaside, and Robert, at just 10 months old, while Margaret was traveling in the West Indies. The other children include Evelyn Margaret, Annie Gale, aka Nina, John Kenrick, aka Ken, Beatrice Rosamond, Lois, and Valerie. The affectionate atmosphere in the family comes over in the children's letters. When traveling, John and Margaret received regular letters from their children, signing off with a sketch of jar full of kisses, complete with a spoon. As they grew up, the children had various interests, much influenced by their parents. Beatrice, Valerie, and Evelyn all went to university, which was unusual for women at that time. Evelyn and Valerie followed in their father's footsteps and became involved in town planning and housing. All of their surviving children married, and many of their descendants have helped to restore Winterbourne House, contributing objects, archival material, and memories. Winterbourne was considered a very important arts and craft house when it was first built. Arts and craft designers believed that a home should be both practical and beautiful. They were inspired by Jacobean and medieval architecture and encouraged the use of local craftspeople. All of these principles are reflected in Winterbourne's design. The arts and crafts movement was led by English designers who wanted a return to quality and crafted goods instead of mass-produced items. It flourished from around 1860 to 1910 and is most known for its textiles, ornaments, and wallpapers with simple flower and plant designs or medieval motifs. Above the staircase, you can see the plasterwork on the ceiling and the decorative frieze featuring wildlife. This is a reproduction portrait of John Sutton Nettlefold. It was painted in the same year that the family moved into Winterbourne. At that time, John was 38 years old and a well-respected local politician and reformer. He was chair of Birmingham's first housing committee and had already effected improvements to housing conditions in slum areas. John Nettlefold's study. This room is dedicated to John Sutton Nettlefold and his work. On his desk lays the plans for the Morpole Estate, which John created as part of his vision to move people from crowded back-to-back houses into pleasant communities with green spaces. John was involved in the council, charities, the courts, and the Unitarian Church in Birmingham. By his death in 1930, he had made a lasting impact on civic life. John became a city councillor in 1898, representing Edgbaston in Harborne Ward. In 1901, he joined the newly formed Housing Committee as its first chairman. For over 20 years, he was magistrate for the city. John also gave his time to the Birmingham and Midlands Hospital for Women, Graham Street Charity School, and Fazeley Street Mission. John Sutton Nettlefold was born in London to a wealthy industrialist family of high achievers. He moved to Birmingham in 1878 after the death of his father, Edward John Nettlefold. The family was reputed as having loud personalities, and John Sutton Nettlefold said that he often felt as though he didn't fit in. John attended Amersham Hall School in Caversham, Oxfordshire, a Unitarian boarding school. Unitarians were not accepted at public schools such as Eton and Harrow because their religion differed from the fundamental beliefs of the Church of England. At 17, John Sutton Nettlefold began his career working for the family firm, the screw manufacturing giants Nettlefold, which later became part of the famous company Guest, Keane and Nettlefold. In his 20s, he was sent to South Wales to run Nettlefold's iron works in Newport. Following his marriage, he decided to leave the company, a move which caused major arguments with his family. In November 1890, Margaret Chamberlain attended a dance at Newhall, the home of her ardent suitor, John Nettlefold. She danced with him 5 times, indicating that she was beginning to look favorably upon his marriage proposal. Margaret wrote in her diary, "Mama said I should not dance more than 3 times with anyone. I really can't say how it came about, but I danced 5 times with John. I had a delightful time." John attended a conference in New York in September 1890 as a member of the English Iron and Steel Institute. He was courting Margaret Chamberlain and wrote to her constantly. John and Margaret were second cousins. John Sutton Nettlefold's grandmother, Martha Chamberlain, was Margaret Chamberlain's great-aunt. John and Margaret's families were closely connected through DNA, business, faith, and local politics. They married on the 14th of September 1891 at the Church of the Messiah in Birmingham. The couple lived in South Wales, then in Selly Oak. In 1904, they moved into Winterbourne, the dream home they had designed together for their family. Sadly, John's health began to deteriorate, leading to a breakdown in 1913. He was moved to a psychiatric hospital in Gloucestershire, while Margaret remained at Winterbourne to look after the family. This continued until 1919, when Margaret decided to sell Winterbourne and move to Bampton, a property closer to John. He remained in hospital with occasional visits home and trips out until his death in 1930. Margaret outlived him by almost 20 years. Nina's room. We cannot be sure whether it was actually Nina's room, but it has been styled for a 16-year-old girl from the period. The outfit by the window is an example of an Edwardian summer dress worn by young girls of Nina's social standing. In that era, there was not such a thing as teenager, so a 16-year-old Tina would have been seen as a blossoming young lady. After leaving the nursery, the Nettlefold children moved to their own bedrooms. All the children were expected to act as adults, as the term teenager was not widely used until the 1940s. Unlike today, The children's rooms were decorated for adults. The Nettlefold children spend their spare time occupied in activities that are still enjoyed by young people today, such as reading, dancing, drawing, and painting. Nina and her sister Evie were lucky to be able to study in Paris in their late teens. Like teenagers today, they were keen to go out and socialize, however their mother still monitored their activities. The wallpaper on the main wall is Marigold by William Morris. The design combines marigold flowers and foliage. The bed is an original arts and crafts piece and is made of ash wood. The dressing room. This dressing room was shared by the two bedrooms on either side of it. The displays in here feature dress and textiles from the period, some of which were owned and worn by members of the Nettlefold's extended family. Eastern silks were highly sought after in Edwardian Britain. Margaret Nettlefold's sister, Ruth Chamberlain, traveled to Myanmar in 1906 and enjoyed herself shopping for textiles at the local markets. Collars and cuffs were often detachable, which could be worn with different outfits. While dresses were difficult to launder, collars could be washed and starched, so they always looked fresh. Margaret was wearing a superb lace collar for a portrait by Bham Shaw in 1904. The hats on the bottom shelf belonged to John Archibald Kenrick. He married John Sutton Nettlefold's sister, Grace, in 1912. Top hats were commonly worn on formal occasions in the late 19th century. The opera hat folded flat so that it could be put away discreetly, for instance when the wearer was at the theater. The Nettlefold's only surviving son, John Kenrick Nettlefold, or Ken, as he was affectionately known, was 7 when his family moved to the newly built Winterbourne House. He spent much of his childhood exploring and playing in the garden. This room represents what his bedroom might have looked like before he left the family home. Ken would have participated in sports such as cricket, rugby, and polo, which were all growing in popularity at the time. In his early teens, Ken boarded at Packwood Hall Preparation School in Warwickshire before attaining a scholarship to Marlborough College. Ken went on to be a keen academic and published author, before becoming a Unitarian minister and eventually a Church of England rector. Ken chose a church much to his mother's disappointment, who had hoped he would become involved in the family business. Ken had a difficult relationship with his mother Margaret. When he married Phyllis Barsley in 1946, he stated in his book, I quote, "My mother wept tears of joy because a woman had at least been found to have pity on me." The nursery. The Nettlefolds wanted the nursery to be light and airy for the children, so it has windows on two sides overlooking the garden. The children would have played and slept in the room and even had their lessons here from the nurse before they were old enough to attend the local schools. The nursery provided space for both play and learning. The children had a full-time nurse who would have taught them in their early years. The Nettlefolds believed strongly in education for girls. Their daughters went to Edgbaston High School, where Margaret had been a pupil herself. In the nursery, you can see typical toys that the children would have played with, such as a rocking horse and a model railway and sailing yacht. The Nettlefold children would have played with balls, skittles, hoops, tiddlywinks, and toy trains. The nurse slept in this room close to the nursery. Most of the household servants had bedrooms on the second floor of the house, overlooking the gardens. Elizabeth was the first occupant of this bedroom at Winterbourne. She had joined the Nettlefolds in 1898 when they lived in Selly Oak. By 1898, there were already 3 children in the family and 4 more followed. Janet King was hired in January 1913 at the age of 26. She was very popular with the Nettlefold children, who nicknamed her Jean Jan. When she started, she would have been caring for Valerie, Lois, and Beatrice, who were then 4, 10, and 13. During World War I, there was a huge demand for female labor, and in October 1917, Janet left to take up war work. However, this wasn't the end of her association with the Nettlefolds. Their eldest daughter, Evelyn, later employed Jean Jan as a nurse for her own children. The Wheelock family bought the house from the Nettlefolds in 1919 and lived there until 1925, when John Nicholson took over the house. Nicholson was the last private owner of Winterbourne before it passed to university ownership. Harry Wheelock was a Birmingham-based lawyer, and Winterbourne was an ideal home for his 9 children. They enjoyed games of tennis on the top lawn and explored the wilder areas of the grounds. John Nicholson bought the house in 1925 because he loved the large garden. John was the son of a Scottish crofter and went on to become a successful wholesale draper. He married the daughter of his business partner, and their company, Bell and Nicholson, became one of the largest employers in the city. The Nicholsons regularly entertained friends and family at Winterbourne, and Johnson's wedding reception even took place in the grounds. The family also introduced an open day when employees of the family firm were invited to visit the garden. As time passed, it became more difficult for John to care for the house and garden, especially when staff left to fight in the Second World War. When he passed away in 1944, the University of Birmingham, which had developed around the property, inherited Winterbourne. This alcove contained a small elevator which could be raised and lowered on a pulley system. When the Nettlefolds lived here, it connected directly with the kitchen and enabled the servants to raise food and drink from the kitchen to the first floor without carrying it up the stairs. It is known as the dumbwaiter. Winterbourne was a very modern house for its time, with hot running water upstairs and electric lighting. Despite its state-of-the-art facilities, the role of housemaid still involved hard physical work, and there were few labor-saving devices available. Under the university's ownership, Winterbourne became an annex to University House, providing accommodation for female students who enjoyed studying and relaxing in the ground. However, by the early 1960s, it was decided that the students needed more modern living facilities and the halls closed. The house then became a teaching facility which was used by several different departments, including the Department of Extramural Studies and Lifelong Learning. As time passed, the university lacked the staff and funds to maintain such a large property, and the house and garden no longer offered the facilities required by the rapidly developing organizations. When the final occupants, the business school, moved out in 2005, the house was left empty and unused except for occasional lectures. A new life began for Winterbourne when the house and garden were taken over by the Department of Hospitality and Accommodation Services in 2006. The renewed focus of the dedicated team transformed the site, and in 2008, the garden was awarded a Grade 2 listing as a garden of national importance. Meanwhile, the house was now over 100 years old and in need of significant investment to make it usable again. A short while after the garden achieved listed status, the university decided to create a heritage attraction, bringing the house and garden into harmony once again. Following an 8-month restoration project, the house was opened to the public for the first time in May 2010, and in early 2017, Winterbourne was awarded full museum status.